Midnight arrived without ceremony. No wind at the windows. No sound but the slow ticking of the clock on the living room wall, each second falling like a drop of water into an already full cup. Margaret Hale sat alone on the couch, her phone resting in both palms as if it were something fragile, something alive that might stop breathing if she loosened her grip. The screen glowed dimly against the dark room, illuminating the fine lines on her face, the ones that had deepened not from age alone, but from waiting. She had been waiting all evening. Daniel had promised to call. He always did. Even on his busiest days. Even when meetings ran late, even when traffic stretched for miles, even when exhaustion bent his shoulders low, Daniel never went to sleep without letting his mother hear his voice. Sometimes it was only a minute. Sometimes only a soft, "I'm home, Mom. Talk tomorrow." But tonight, there was nothing. At first, Margaret told herself it was nothing. A delayed meeting. A drained phone battery. A simple, harmless forgetfulness. She reheated her dinner twice without touching it. The soup grew thick and tasteless, as if it had been waiting too long for its purpose. She turned the television on, then off again, unable to focus on the voices of strangers laughing somewhere far away from her living room. At 7, she sent a message. "Did you get home safe?" At 8, another. "Call me when you can. I'll wait." At 9, she tried calling. The phone rang. And rang. And rang. Then silence. By 10, the unease had crept into her chest like a cold. By 11, it had settled there, heavy and immovable, pressing against her lungs every time she tried to breathe deeply. Margaret stood and paced the room, her slippers whispering against the floor. She stopped by the window, peered out at the empty street. The neighbors' houses were dark, curtains drawn, lives tucked safely into sleep. Everyone else's world was allowed to rest. Hers was not. At 11:47 p.m., she dialed Daniel again. Straight to voicemail. Her throat tightened. She didn't leave a message. She was afraid of what her voice might sound like if she did, afraid it would betray her fear before she was ready to name it. She tried to calm herself the way she always had when Daniel was a child. "Don't imagine disasters," she whispered to herself. "Don't invite tragedy by thinking its name." She sat back down. Folded her hands in her lap. Forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale. Then her eyes drifted to another name on her phone. Elena Brooks. Her daughter-in-law. Margaret hesitated. Elena was polished. Sharp. Always perfectly composed, even when life bent in ways that should have wrinkled a person. Conversations with her felt like walking on a floor that looked solid but echoed hollow beneath each step. Margaret had learned, over the years, to choose her words carefully around Elena. For Daniel's sake, she swallowed discomfort. For her granddaughter's sake, she swallowed more. Still, tonight, she pressed the name. The call rang 3 times. Then stopped. No answer. Margaret stared at the darkened screen, her reflection faintly visible. The woman looking back at her seemed older than she remembered. Smaller. "Maybe she's asleep," Margaret murmured, though she did not believe it. The clock ticked closer to midnight. She went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water that tasted like nothing, then returned to the couch, to the same spot, to the same waiting. At exactly 12 a.m., the phone vibrated in her hands. Margaret flinched. The name on the screen made her heart jump painfully against her ribs. Elena Brooks. She answered immediately. "Hello? Elena?" Her voice came out thin, stretched tight by fear. "Where's Daniel? I've been calling him all evening." There was no greeting on the other end. No pause. No softening of tone. Just words, flat, clean, merciless. "Your son died this afternoon." Margaret felt the room tilt. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Thought perhaps the sentence had arrived incomplete, missing context, missing sense. What did you say? She whispered. Elena isn't joking, Mrs. Hale, the voice continued, steady and strangely calm. Daniel was in an accident. He didn't make it. The clock ticked loudly. Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone until they hurt. No, she said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just, no. That's not possible. I spoke to him this morning. He said he'd call me tonight. There was a delay with the police report, Elena replied. Everything happened very fast. Where is he? Margaret asked. Which hospital? I'll come right now. A faint sigh came through the line, impatient, restrained. There's no point. Everything has already been handled. The word handled fell like a stone. Margaret's breath stuttered. Handled how? The funeral is on Sunday, Elena said. Arrangements are made. Sunday. 3 days from now. My son is dead, Margaret whispered, as if saying it softly might make it less real. And you're telling me like this? I'm calling to inform you, Elena replied. And to clarify a few things so there won't be misunderstandings later. Something cold slid down Margaret's spine. Elena. I don't understand. Daniel left a will, Elena continued. Everything goes to me and our daughter. The house. The accounts. The insurance. You aren't listed as a beneficiary. The words came neatly packaged. Organized. Final. You called me, Margaret said slowly, to tell me my son is dead, and to tell me I get nothing? There was a pause this time. Just long enough to feel deliberate. I'm being transparent, Elena said. So later there won't be drama. Margaret closed her eyes. Her chest burned. Not from greed. Not from loss of money. From something far more brutal. I never wanted his money, she whispered. I just wanted my son. Well, Elena replied coolly, that's not something anyone can change now. Margaret's lips trembled. I want to see him, she said. Please. I need to see him. Sunday is enough, Elena said. There's no reason for you to come before that. Please, Margaret begged, the word tearing itself from her throat before she could stop it. He's my child. Silence. Then, colder than before, I have a lot to take care of. I won't be answering more calls tonight. The line went dead. Margaret lowered the phone slowly. The screen went dark. The clock kept ticking. The house did not change. The walls stayed where they were. The furniture did not move. The world did not acknowledge that something irreversible had just been spoken into existence. Margaret sat there, unmoving. Her son was dead. That was what she had been told. And yet, her phone was still warm in her hands. Her heart was still beating. And somewhere, deep in a place she could not yet name, something inside her refused to believe that a mother could lose her child so quietly, so cleanly, through a voice that sounded more concerned with paperwork than with grief. She pressed Daniel's name one more time. The call did not connect. Her shoulders shook. A single tear fell onto the dark screen of her phone. Outside, the night remained indifferent. And somewhere beyond the walls of that silent house, the truth waited, unseen, bleeding, and very much alive. Margaret did not move for a long time after the call ended. The phone lay in her lap like something abandoned, its screen black, its silence louder than any sound. The house felt unfamiliar now, too large, too empty, as if the walls had quietly stepped back to watch her fall apart. Daniel is dead. The sentence did not land all at once. It arrived in fragments, cutting slowly, testing her nerves, waiting to see which part of her would give way first. She pressed her palm against her chest, breathing shallowly. The ache there was sharp, but clean pain would have been easier. This was different. This was confusion braided with dread. Something was wrong. Not the news alone, death came to everyone eventually. Margaret knew that. She had buried her husband years ago, stood by a grave with soil still damp, learned how grief hollowed a person out from the inside. But that night, there had been no tremble in Elena's voice. No crack. No pause to swallow tears. Just information. Margaret stood, legs weak, and walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, but her hand shook so badly that half of it spilled onto the counter. She did not bother wiping it away. At 12:17 a.m., her phone vibrated again. Elena Brooks. Margaret stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. She answered. Yes? Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw by crying she had not yet fully released. I forgot to tell you a few things, Elena said, brisk, efficient, like someone calling back about a missed appointment. Margaret closed her eyes. Go on, she whispered. The visitation will be Saturday afternoon, Elena continued. Private. Family only. The burial is Sunday morning. 9 a.m. I'll text you the address. Margaret waited. She did not know what she was waiting for, maybe a break in the voice, maybe a sigh that sounded like sorrow, maybe even silence heavy enough to mean something. Nothing came. Is he alone right now? Margaret asked. My son. Is someone with him? There was a brief pause. Not emotional. Calculated. The funeral home has him, Elena replied. Everything is under control. Under control. Margaret felt the word scrape against her bones. Did he? Her throat closed. She forced the words out anyway. Did Daniel say anything? Before it happened? No, Elena said flatly. It was sudden. Sudden. Margaret pictured Daniel that morning, laughing lightly through the phone, saying he'd call her later. Do you need anything, Mom? He'd asked, like he always did. Sudden didn't fit. Were you with him? Margaret asked. Yes, Elena replied without hesitation. I was the one who identified him. Identified. Margaret's knees buckled slightly, and she leaned against the kitchen counter for support. I need to see him, she said again. Please. Just for a moment. I won't cause trouble. That's not necessary, Elena said. It wouldn't change anything. The word struck harder than anger ever could. You're telling me, Margaret said slowly, that my son is dead, and I don't even get to look at him? That's correct. Margaret's fingers curled into her palm. And the will? She asked quietly. You said, everything goes to you? Yes, Elena answered. Daniel updated it last year. Everything is legally settled. Last year, Margaret repeated. When? After the business expanded, Elena said. He wanted to make sure things were secure for us. For us. Not for the woman who raised him. Not for the mother who stayed awake nights sewing buttons back onto his school uniform, who sat in freezing parking lots waiting for his practices to end, who learned how to love quietly so he could grow loudly. I don't want his money, Margaret said, her voice trembling. I don't want the house. I don't want anything that belonged to him. I just want. Mrs. Hale, Elena interrupted, her tone sharpening slightly, I'm trying to be respectful. But this conversation is starting to go in circles. Circles. Margaret laughed softly, a broken, humorless sound that surprised even herself. My son died today, she said. My world collapsed in one phone call. And you're worried about efficiency. There it was. A flicker of irritation. Elena is exhausted, Elena said. I've been dealing with the police, the hospital, lawyers, paperwork, everything. I don't have the energy to manage emotional outbursts right now. Emotional outbursts. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. I'm his mother, she said. If this isn't the moment for emotion, then when is? Silence followed. Then Elena spoke again, cooler than before. Look, she said. I called to inform you. I've done my part. If you come on Sunday, come quietly. If you don't, that's your choice. But please don't complicate things. Complicate. Margaret understood then, not fully, not yet, but enough for something inside her to shift. This wasn't grief speaking. This wasn't shock. This was management. Elena, Margaret said carefully, do you miss him? The question hung between them. A pause, longer this time. I loved my husband, Elena said finally. But love doesn't bring people back. No, I'm broken. No, I don't know how to breathe. No, I wish this weren't real. Just closure. I see, Margaret whispered. I'll send you the funeral details, Elena said. Please don't call again tonight. The call ended. Margaret stood frozen in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming softly beside her, the clock ticking steadily somewhere behind her. Her son was gone. But the woman who had just spoken to her sounded untouched. Margaret slid down against the cabinet and sat on the cold floor, her back pressed to the wood. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, not because she wanted comfort, but because her body did not know what else to do. Grief was supposed to be loud. Messy. Uncontrolled. This was something else. This was a voice that had already moved on. Margaret stared at the dark hallway leading to the back of the house, her thoughts unraveling. If Daniel were truly dead. If the man she raised had truly vanished from this world. Why did the night feel like it was holding its breath? And why, deep in her chest, did she feel not only sorrow, but the quiet, terrifying certainty that she had not been told the whole truth? Margaret did not know how long she sat on the kitchen floor. Time had lost its edges. Minutes stretched, then collapsed into one another, until the clock no longer mattered. All that existed was the hollow ache inside her chest and the echo of Elena's voice, controlled, distant, already finished with grief. She eventually pushed herself up, legs trembling, and returned to the living room. The couch where she had waited for Daniel's call now looked like a stranger. She did not sit. Sitting felt too much like surrender. The house was unbearably quiet. No television. No footsteps. No voices. Only the ticking clock, each second marking the space Daniel no longer occupied. Margaret pressed Daniel's name again. The call failed. Her breath hitched. She hugged the phone to her chest like a child clutching a broken toy, something that still carried warmth even after it stopped working. Please, she whispered into the empty room. If this is real, give me a sign. The words barely left her mouth when something answered. Tap. Margaret froze. It was so soft she almost missed it, more a suggestion of sound than a sound itself. She held her breath, listening. The house settled. Pipes groaned faintly. The clock continued its merciless counting. Tap. Tap. This time, unmistakable. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. It was coming from the back of the house. The back door. Her skin prickled. Every story she had ever heard about midnight noises rushed to the surface of her mind, stories she had laughed at in daylight and feared in darkness. It's nothing, she whispered. Just the house. She took one step toward the hallway, then stopped. Tap. Slower now. Weaker. As if whoever, or whatever, was making it was running out of strength. Margaret swallowed hard. Her legs felt hollow, but something deeper than fear pulled her forward. She reached for the broom leaning against the wall, gripping it tightly, ridiculous and desperate. She walked down the narrow hallway, each step heavy. The light above the sink cast long shadows across the floor, stretching her reflection until it looked like someone else entirely. The back door stood closed. Locked. Another sound came, not a knock this time. A breath. Ragged. Uneven. Margaret's mouth went dry. "Who's there?" she called, forcing the words past her fear. No answer. Then. A voice. So faint it barely existed. "Mom." Margaret's knees gave way. The broom clattered to the floor. Her mind rejected the sound before her heart could react. This was grief. Hallucination. A cruel trick played by exhaustion and shock. "I'm losing it," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I've finally lost it. Mom, please." The voice broke. It was hoarse. Raw. Familiar in a way that tore straight through her chest. Margaret staggered forward until her forehead rested against the cold wood of the door. "Daniel," she whispered, afraid that saying the name aloud would shatter whatever fragile thing was holding her together. A soft thud answered her, like a body leaning heavily against the door. "Open it," the voice pleaded. "I can't stand." Her hands flew to the lock. They shook so badly she missed it the first time. The metal scraped uselessly. Panic surged. She tried again. Click. The door opened a few inches. The smell hit her first. Blood. Dirt. Metal. Margaret gasped. She pulled the door open wider, and the world tilted violently out of place. Daniel stood there. Or what was left of him. His body was bent forward, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other hanging uselessly at his side. His shirt was torn and soaked dark with blood. Mud streaked his pants, his shoes. His face was swollen, one eye nearly closed, his lips split and trembling. But it was his eyes. God, his eyes. Still alive. Still searching for her. "Mom," he said again. And then his legs buckled. Margaret screamed. She dropped to her knees just in time to catch him as his weight collapsed forward, nearly crushing her. She wrapped her arms around him, straining under his heaviness, her heart hammering wildly. Oh God, Daniel," she sobbed, pulling him closer, afraid that if she loosened her grip even for a second he would disappear. "You're here. You're here. You're alive." His body shook violently. His breath came in short, painful bursts. They said you were dead," she cried, her tears soaking into his bloodied shirt. "They told me you were gone." Daniel tried to smile. It was the weakest thing she had ever seen. "I knocked," he whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Margaret dragged him inside with strength she did not know she possessed, slamming the door shut behind them. She locked it. Then locked it again, her hands moving on instinct alone. She lowered him carefully onto the floor, cradling his head in her lap. Blood smeared her hands, her clothes, her skin, but she did not care. "I'm here," she whispered over and over, stroking his hair like she had when he was small. "I've got you. You're safe. You're safe." Daniel's fingers twitched weakly, brushing against her wrist as if to confirm she was real. "They wanted me gone," he murmured, his voice fading. "Elena. Ryan." Margaret felt something inside her crack, not break, but harden. "They won't touch you again," she said, though she had no idea how she would make it true. "I swear it. You hear me? I swear." Daniel's eyes fluttered. "Don't let them," he whispered. "Shoo," Margaret said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength. I'm here. I won't let go." His hands slipped from her wrist. His body went limp. "No, No, no, Margaret cried, shaking him gently. Daniel, stay with me. Don't you dare leave me now. Not after this. Not after coming home. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening desperately. A heartbeat. Faint. But there. Margaret collapsed over him, her sobs shaking the room. Just minutes ago, she had been a mother told her child was dead. Now she was a mother holding her son between life and death, his blood on her hands, his weight in her arms, the truth finally standing in her kitchen, broken, breathing, and undeniable. Outside, the night remained silent. Inside, everything had changed. Chapter 4, A Son Who Refused to Die. Margaret did not sleep. She sat on the floor beside Daniel's body long after the shock had settled into something colder, sharper. She pressed a towel against the deepest gash on his arm, her hands steady now, not because she was calm, but because fear had burned itself out and left focus in its place. Daniel stirred sometime near dawn. A weak sound escaped his throat, more breath than voice. His eyelids fluttered, struggled, then opened just enough for her to see him searching the room, searching her. Mom, he whispered, unsure. I'm here, Margaret said immediately. She leaned forward, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Don't try to move. Please. He swallowed with difficulty. His lips were cracked, stained dark. They told you. I was dead, he said. Margaret nodded once. Slowly. Yes. A bitter, broken sound left his chest, almost a laugh, almost a sob. They were supposed to make sure, he murmured. I guess. I didn't die fast enough. Her fingers tightened in the towel. Who? She asked. Daniel closed his eyes. Elena, he said. And after a pause that felt like a knife being turned slowly. Ryan. Margaret felt the room contract. She had known something was wrong from the moment Elena spoke without tears. From the way death had sounded like an item on a checklist. But hearing her name spoken like this, attached to blood, to betrayal, shifted something inside Margaret permanently. Daniel took a shallow breath, then another, forcing himself to continue. She asked me to drive with her, he said. Said we needed to talk. Said she was tired of arguing in front of our daughter. I thought maybe she wanted to fix things. Margaret's jaw clenched. She picked the road, Daniel continued. Up near the ridge. No houses. No traffic. She said it was quiet there. Good place to think. His fingers twitched weakly against the floor. When I stopped the car, another vehicle pulled in behind us. I hadn't even turned the engine off yet when someone yanked the door open. Margaret's breath caught. Ryan, Daniel said. He hit me before I could stand. His voice faltered. Margaret leaned closer, her presence the only thing anchoring him. They kicked me, he whispered. In the ribs. The stomach. I tried to get up, tried to fight, but she was just standing there, Mom. Watching. Margaret closed her eyes. She told him to hurry, Daniel said. Said the sooner it was over, the sooner they could be free. Free. Margaret felt a heat rise from her chest to her throat, but she did not scream. She did not cry. Her grief was changing shape, compressing, hardening, turning inward into something dangerously quiet. They pushed the car, Daniel continued, each word costing him. Let it roll. Made it look like I drove off the road. I remember hearing it crash below. Loud. Final. He swallowed again. I thought that was it. I thought, that's how my daughter would remember me. Margaret's hand slid to his, gripping it firmly. But I didn't die, he said. I don't know how. I must have rolled away when they dragged me. Hit my head. Everything went dark. His eyes filled, but no tears fell. When I woke up, it was almost night. My phone was gone. My wallet too. I could barely breathe. But I knew one thing. He turned his head slightly, forcing his gaze to meet hers. I couldn't go to a hospital. Margaret nodded. She understood without explanation. They would find me, Daniel said. She would make sure of it. So I walked, he whispered. I crawled when I couldn't walk. I followed the road signs. I followed the thought of you. Margaret pressed her forehead to his hand, her shoulders trembling, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of a love that had survived even attempted death. She called you, Daniel said quietly. Didn't she? Yes, Margaret answered. Her voice was low. Controlled. She told me you were dead. She told me everything you owned belonged to her. Daniel's jaw tightened. She didn't even wait, he murmured. She was already dividing me up. Margaret straightened. Something in her face changed. The woman who had collapsed on the kitchen floor hours earlier, the woman who begged to see her son's body, was gone. In her place sat a mother whose child had been hunted and discarded. They wanted you erased, Margaret said calmly. Not just dead. Forgotten. Daniel nodded slowly. They think I am, he said. Margaret looked at him then, not at his wounds, not at the blood, but at the life still stubbornly burning behind his pain. No, she said. They think wrong. She reached for a clean cloth, pressed it gently to his brow, her movements careful and deliberate. You didn't refuse to die for nothing, she continued, her voice steady as stone. You came here because you trusted me. And I will not let that trust be wasted. Daniel watched her, confused, exhausted. What are you saying, Mom? Margaret met his gaze without blinking. I'm saying, she replied, that from this moment on, we do not scream. We do not confront. We do not warn. Her grip tightened around his hand, not painful, but absolute. We let them believe what they want to believe, she said. We let them think you're buried. A flicker of understanding passed through Daniel's eyes. And then, he asked. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin, unwavering line. Then, she said quietly. We make sure the truth stands up and walks into the light, just like you did. Daniel closed his eyes, a tear finally escaping the corner of one. Outside, the first hint of morning crept into the sky. Inside that small house, grief had finished breaking. What remained was resolve. Light seeped through the curtains as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if the world had not tried, very deliberately, to erase Margaret's son the night before. Birds sang outside. A car passed down the street. Somewhere, someone laughed. Inside the house, Daniel lay hidden between breaths. Margaret moved quietly, carefully, as though sound itself could betray them. She dragged a thin mattress from the spare room and spread it on the floor of the small storage room behind the kitchen, a room no one ever entered, a room that smelled faintly of dust and old paint. She lowered Daniel onto it inch by inch, murmuring apologies with every wince that crossed his face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it hurts. I know. Daniel nodded weakly. Sweat beaded at his temples. His skin felt too cold under her fingers, then suddenly too warm. Stay with me, she said. Just stay. When she stepped back into the kitchen, the blood stopped her. It was everywhere. Dark smears on the tile. Handprints on the doorframe. Drops trailing like a map of pain from the back door to the hallway. Proof that the impossible had happened. Margaret stared at it for a moment, her chest tight. Then she rolled up her sleeves. She filled a bucket with hot water, added soap, and began scrubbing. Each stroke of the cloth felt like an act of defiance. She wiped away the stains slowly, methodically, her jaw clenched, her movements precise. This was not denial. This was protection. If anyone came, neighbors, police, Elena, there could be no trace. No question. No crack in the story already being told to the world. By the time the floor was clean, Margaret's arms ached and her knees burned. She sank onto a chair, breathing hard, then forced herself to stand again. Daniel groaned faintly from the storage room. She rushed to him. His eyes were half open, unfocused. His breathing had grown shallow. "No," she whispered, panic clawing up her throat. "No, no, don't slip away now." She needed help. But help was dangerous. Hospitals kept records. Ambulances asked questions. Questions led to names, and names led back to the woman who had already decided Daniel was better off dead. Margaret sat beside him, her thoughts racing. Then she remembered. Dr. Hannah Reeves. A general practitioner from the small clinic near the old church. A woman Margaret had known for years. A woman who had stitched her finger once, who had held her hand after her husband died, who still asked about Daniel every time Margaret came in for a checkup. Margaret's hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She hesitated only once, then dialed. "Hannah," Margaret whispered when the call connected. "I need you. Please." "I wouldn't ask if it weren't desperate." There was a pause. Then concern flooded the other end of the line. "Margaret? It's barely 6 in the morning. What's wrong?" "My son," Margaret said, her voice breaking despite herself. "He's alive. They tried to kill him." Silence. Then, carefully, "Where are you?" "In my house," Margaret said. "I can't take him to a hospital. They'll find him." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Hannah said quietly. "Don't call anyone else." Margaret exhaled for the first time since midnight. While she waited, her phone began to buzz. Messages. She didn't need to look to know who they were from. Group notifications. Family chats. Condolences. "So sorry for your loss. We just heard about Daniel. May he rest in peace." Margaret stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. They were mourning a man who was still breathing in the next room. The world was already burying him. She turned the phone face down. A knock sounded at the front door. Margaret's heart leapt into her throat. Then she remembered, Hannah. She opened the door just enough to let the doctor slip inside. Hannah took one look at Margaret's face, pale, hollow-eyed, blood still faintly staining her sleeves, and nodded without asking questions. "Show me," she said. They worked in silence. Hannah cleaned wounds, stitched what she could, administered pain medication and antibiotics from her emergency kit. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, his grip tightening briefly around Margaret's hand each time pain pulled him back to the surface. "He's lucky," Hannah said finally, her voice low. "And he's not. He lost a lot of blood. He needs rest. Complete rest. No hospitals. No stress." Margaret nodded. "Can he survive here?" she asked. Hannah met her eyes. He already did. When Hannah left, the house fell quiet again. Margaret sat beside Daniel as the sun climbed higher, listening to his breathing, slow, uneven, but there. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Elena. "The funeral announcement has gone out. Please don't post anything confusing online." Margaret stared at the words. Then she looked at her son. Alive. Broken. Breathing. Something inside her settled into place. She typed a single reply. Understood. She set the phone down, turned off the lights in the back room, and closed the door gently. Outside, the world mourned. Inside, Margaret kept watch. And for the first time since the call at midnight, she did not feel powerless. She felt ready. Elena arrived just before noon. Margaret knew it before the knock came. Some instinct, honed by motherhood, sharpened by betrayal, told her the moment another presence crossed the invisible boundary of the house. The knock was firm. Controlled. Not the sound of someone unsure whether they were welcome. Margaret stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the other clenched at her side. From the back room came the faint, steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing. Alive. Hidden. Trusting her. She inhaled once. Then she walked to the front door. Elena stood on the porch dressed in black. Not wrinkled black. Not careless black. But carefully chosen, tailored coat, modest cut, expensive shoes dulled just enough to suggest humility. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her face pale, eyes rimmed red in a way that suggested she had practiced crying and stopped at the precise moment it would leave a mark. In her arms, she carried a slim leather folder. "Mom," Elena said softly, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. She wrapped her arms around Margaret. The embrace was warm. Tight. Performative. Margaret did not hug back immediately. The scent of Elena's perfume, floral, expensive, made something bitter rise in her throat. This was the same woman who had spoken of Daniel's death like a transaction. The same woman who had not waited a single night before dividing his life into assets. "I'm so sorry," Elena whispered, her voice trembling just enough. "I didn't want to come so soon, but there are things we need to take care of." Margaret nodded slowly and stepped aside. "Come in." Elena entered the living room, her eyes sweeping the space briefly, assessing, measuring, before she sat down carefully on the couch. She placed the folder on the coffee table as if it were fragile, sacred. Margaret remained standing. For a moment, neither spoke. Elena broke the silence first. "I still can't believe he's gone," she said, pressing her fingers to her temple. "Everything happened so fast. One minute we were arguing about something stupid, the next, she stopped, inhaled sharply, lowered her gaze. Margaret watched her closely. No tears fell. "I wanted to spare you the chaos," Elena continued. "Police. Insurance agents. Lawyers. I didn't want you dragged into all that stress." Margaret's lips parted. "You spared me," she repeated quietly. "Yes," Elena said, nodding. "I know how fragile you are." The word fragile landed like a slap. Elena opened the folder. Inside were neatly arranged documents, copied, highlighted, organized. A life flattened into paper. "This is Daniel's will," Elena said, sliding the first document forward. "Signed and notarized last year." Margaret did not touch it. "This is the deed to the house," Elena continued. "These are the business accounts. The insurance policy. Everything is, very clear." Clear. Margaret finally sat down, slowly, deliberately, across from her daughter-in-law. "And why," Margaret asked, her voice level, "are you showing me this now?" Elena looked up, her eyes sharp beneath the softness. "I don't want misunderstandings," she said. "Grief makes people emotional. I'd rather we handle this calmly." Calmly. Margaret glanced at the folder again. "And custody?" she asked. Elena's fingers paused for a fraction of a second. "Piper is my daughter," Elena said. "Daniel would have wanted her stability protected." "Daniel would have wanted his mother erased?" Margaret asked. Elena smiled faintly. Carefully. "Let's not turn this into something ugly," she said. "I'm willing to let you see Piper, as long as things stay respectful." Respectful. Margaret felt the fury rise, hot and violent, but she did not let it show. She lowered her gaze, letting her shoulders slump just enough. "I understand," she said quietly. Elena blinked. "I know you don't want trouble," Margaret continued, her voice thin, controlled. I know you don't want me involved. I won't interfere. Relief flickered across Elena's face, small, almost imperceptible, but there. That's good, she said. That's very wise. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. I just have one request, she said softly. Let me see him. Just once. Before Sunday. Elena's expression hardened. That's not possible, she said quickly. The funeral home advised against it. It's not something you want to remember. Margaret nodded. I see. Elena closed the folder and stood. I'll handle everything, she said. You don't need to worry about money or arrangements. Just rest. Grieve. She stepped closer again, placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. I know this hurts, she whispered. But Daniel trusted me to take care of things. Margaret looked up at her. Trusted? Yes, Margaret said slowly. I can see that. Elena squeezed her shoulder once, then turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. Oh, she added casually. Please don't speak to anyone about alternative stories. It would confuse people. And confusion can affect custody decisions. A threat. Wrapped in concern. Elena smiled, then left. The door closed softly behind her. Margaret did not move. She waited until the sound of Elena's car faded down the street. Only then did she stand. Her hands were shaking, not with grief now, but with rage held tightly in check. She walked to the back room and knelt beside Daniel. She came, Margaret said quietly. Daniel opened his eyes. And, he asked. Margaret met his gaze. She thinks you're dead, she said. She thinks she's already won. Her voice did not waver. That, she continued, is exactly what we need. Daniel closed his eyes, a tear slipping free, not from pain, but from understanding. Outside, the widow played her part perfectly. Inside, a mother sharpened her silence into something far more dangerous than screams. The performance had begun. Margaret learned how to surrender without breaking. She learned it in the days that followed, days that demanded a softness she no longer felt and a silence she had to weaponize. Every morning, she woke before the sun, checked Daniel's breathing, pressed her fingers lightly to his wrist until she felt the pulse answer back. Only then did she allow herself to move through the house as the world expected her to move, slow, bowed, emptied. She answered condolences with nods. She accepted casseroles she did not taste. She let neighbors hug her while their pity pressed like wet cloth against her skin. I'm holding up, she would say, softly. I'm grateful Elena is handling everything. The words tasted like ash. Elena called daily. Not long calls, efficient ones. She spoke of logistics. Paperwork. Timelines. She spoke of Daniel as if he were already an object to be managed rather than a man who still breathed in Margaret's back room. The bank appointment is set, Elena said one afternoon. I'll need your signature on a few acknowledgements. Nothing financial, just confirmation you understand the will. I understand, Margaret replied, keeping her voice low and tired. You don't need to worry about me. There was a pause. Then approval. I knew you'd be reasonable, Elena said. Daniel always said you were practical. Margaret stared at the wall as she listened, imagining Daniel's hand squeezing hers the night before, the way he had whispered thank you, Mom, when she told him she believed him. Practical. Yes, Margaret said. I don't want trouble. When the call ended, she sat at the kitchen table and let the mask fall, just for a moment. Her hands shook, but her mind was sharp. She reached for a notebook she had hidden behind old cookbooks, its pages already filled with names and numbers written small and precise. Dr. Hannah Reeves, medical records. Mr. Clark, the notary, documents and dates. Security camera on Ridge Road, timing. She was not collecting hope. She was collecting leverage. At night, she sat beside Daniel, feeding him soup by the spoonful, wiping his brow when fever crept too close. "She's convincing," Daniel said once, his voice hoarse. "I almost believed her when she called you." Margaret did not look away from him. "That's because she's practiced," she said. "And because people prefer a clean lie to a complicated truth." He nodded, jaw tight. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" he asked. Margaret set the bowl down carefully. "They will," she said. "But not because we shout. Because we wait." She waited for Hannah to return with extra supplies, bandages, antibiotics, pain medication passed quietly from hand to hand. She waited for the neighbor who had mentioned, casually, that the county cameras near Ridge Road had been upgraded last year. She waited for the moment when Elena would stop checking, stop circling, stop guarding the lie. And that moment came sooner than expected. On Thursday afternoon, Elena stopped by again, unannounced this time. Margaret saw her reflection in the window and felt the familiar surge of anger rise, then settle back into control. Elena looked lighter. Almost relieved. "I just wanted to see how you're holding up," she said, stepping inside. "You've been very cooperative." Margaret smiled faintly. "I don't have the energy to fight," she said. "I'm tired." Elena nodded. "That's understandable." She glanced around the living room, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Once the estate transfer is complete," she said, "things will stabilize. Piper will need consistency. I don't want her confused by competing stories." Margaret bowed her head. "I won't confuse her," she said. "You have my word." Elena exhaled, satisfied. "Good," she said. "Then we'll all move on." After Elena left, Margaret locked the door and stood very still in the hallway. The house felt different now, not like a hiding place, but like a bunker. A space where patience could harden into certainty. She went to Daniel and took his hand. "She's stopped watching," Margaret said. "That means she thinks the ground is solid." Daniel's eyes darkened. "And it isn't," he said. Margaret nodded. That night, she made another call, quiet, careful. She did not introduce herself as a grieving mother this time. She introduced herself as a witness who had learned how to survive. "I don't need you to promise anything," she said into the phone. "I just need you to listen." When she hung up, the house was silent again. But it was no longer empty. Margaret lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's breathing and the slow tick of the clock. She felt the fear still, felt it deep in her bones, but it no longer owned her. She had surrendered her voice. She had surrendered her anger. She had surrendered the appearance of strength. What she had not surrendered was the truth. And soon, very soon, she would stop pretending to be broken. Truth did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, uneven, sharp-edged, and heavy in Margaret's hands. She learned to collect it the way one learns to gather broken glass, slowly, carefully, knowing that rushing would only cause deeper wounds. The first piece arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carried in by Hannah in a brown paper bag that once held groceries. Inside were copies of medical notes. Not hospital records, those did not exist, but handwritten observations, dates, times, photographs taken quietly on Hannah's phone before wounds were cleaned and bandaged. Margaret spread them out on the kitchen table. Bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. Defensive wounds on the forearms. Lacerations caused by impact, not glass. Blood loss significant, untreated for hours. Hannah's handwriting was precise. Professional. Unemotional. "This," she said softly, tapping one page, "does not belong to an accident victim who drove off a road alone." Margaret nodded. "I know." Hannah hesitated, then added, if this ever reaches court, these notes will matter. They show intent. Intent. The word stayed with Margaret long after Hannah left. That evening, Daniel spoke more. Not all at once. Pain interrupted him, memory faltered, exhaustion pulled him under. But piece by piece, the story sharpened. He remembered Elena's face, not panicked, not horrified, but tight with urgency. He remembered her saying hurry instead of stop. He remembered Ryan checking the road, not for help, but for witnesses. Margaret wrote everything down in the notebook. Dates. Times. Exact phrases. She did not cry while she wrote. She cried later, alone, into a dish towel in the pantry, where no one could hear her. The second piece arrived through coincidence disguised as kindness. Mrs. Adler from 3 houses down stopped by with muffins and condolences. She stayed longer than expected, talking softly about grief, about how sudden death left questions no one ever answered. Then she said, almost as an afterthought, you know, my nephew works maintenance for the county. He was on Ridge Road the day after that accident. Said police were asking around about footage. Margaret's heart skipped. Footage, she asked carefully. Yes. New cameras were installed last year. Traffic monitoring. People forget they're there. Margaret thanked her, hugged her, watched her leave. Then she closed the door and leaned against it, her legs weak. That night, she called the number her neighbor gave her. She did not say murder. She did not say my son. She said, I'm trying to understand how someone died. The man on the other end of the line, tired, cautious, hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, there is footage. Not all of it was submitted with the report. Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone. Can I see it? She asked. Another pause. Officially? No, he said. But if you come by tomorrow, I can tell you what I saw. The third piece came the next day. Margaret sat alone in a dim office, hands folded in her lap, as a screen flickered to life. The image was grainy. Distant. But unmistakable. Daniel's car pulled to the side of the road. Another vehicle stopped behind it. 2 figures stepped out, one tall, one slender. Margaret felt her throat close. The slender one moved closer. The tall one grabbed first. Then the screen showed Daniel disappearing out of frame, dragged toward the trees. Margaret covered her mouth. She did not scream. She did not look away. The footage continued, showing the other car driving off, Daniel's vehicle rolling forward seconds later, tumbling out of view. When the screen went black, Margaret sat frozen. That's not an accident, the man said quietly behind her. No, Margaret replied. It's not. By the time she returned home, her hands were steady. She laid the notebook on the table. Added times. Added confirmation. Added weight. Daniel watched her from the mattress, his eyes clearer now, more awake. You saw it, he said. Yes, Margaret answered. I saw them. Daniel closed his eyes. So it's real, he whispered. I didn't imagine it. Margaret sat beside him and took his hand. You survived something very real, she said. And now the truth is learning how to breathe. That night, she placed the notebook beside her bed. She did not sleep much. Every new piece of evidence made the picture clearer, and more terrifying. This was no accident. No misunderstanding. No moment of rage gone wrong. It was planned. Timed. Prepared for profit. The world still mourned Daniel Hale. Flowers still arrived. Elena still accepted condolences. The lie continued to move smoothly through polite society. But inside Margaret's house, truth was assembling itself, quietly, relentlessly, like a body remembering how to stand. And when it did, it would not be gentle. The house learned fear before Margaret did. It started with a sound so small it almost passed for nothing, a faint scrape near the back fence, metal brushing metal, followed by the soft crunch of gravel under a careful footstep. Margaret was awake. She always was now. She lay still in the darkness, listening, her body rigid, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that silence was no longer safety, it was exposure. Another sound. Closer. Her heart did not race. It slowed. She slipped out of bed without turning on a light and moved toward the back room. Daniel lay on his side, eyes open, already alert. Pain had taught him how to wake instantly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Margaret nodded. "Don't move," she said softly. Not a muscle. She stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the floor. The house felt different tonight, no longer a refuge, but a fragile shell around something valuable. Click. The sound came again. The back door. Someone was testing it. Margaret's stomach dropped. She reached for the phone in her pocket, fingers hovering over the screen. Calling the police would be the obvious choice. The fatal one. Questions would come. Names would be spoken. Elena's lie would feel threatened. And threatened lies lash out. Another sound, this time sharper. The unmistakable snap of a lock being forced. Margaret moved. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from the drawer and crept toward the kitchen. The back door handle turned slowly, carefully, as if whoever stood outside had learned patience the hard way. The door did not open. Margaret had locked it twice. She exhaled quietly. A shadow passed across the frosted glass. Then a voice, low, male, unfamiliar. "Hurry up." Margaret's blood ran cold. Daniel. They were looking for Daniel. Her silence had bought time, but it had also raised suspicion. A sharp crack split the air as something struck the doorframe. The wood shuddered. Margaret stepped back, her grip tightening on the flashlight. "Mom," Daniel whispered from the hallway, fear naked in his voice now. "Stay down," she hissed. "Whatever happens, stay down." The door rattled again. Harder this time. Margaret's mind moved faster than her body. If they got inside, if they saw Daniel breathing, living, the lie would collapse violently. There would be no pretending left. Only survival. She flicked on the porch light. The sudden brightness startled whoever stood outside. Margaret heard a curse, muffled, angry. She flung open the front door instead and stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air biting her skin. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice trembling just enough to sound like fear, not challenge. "I'm calling the police." Footsteps scattered. Running. By the time Margaret reached the side of the house, the yard was empty. The fence gate swung slightly, disturbed. A loose crowbar lay abandoned in the grass. Her hands shook now. Not with panic. With confirmation. She locked the front door and leaned against it, her breath coming fast. Daniel was no longer just a secret. He was a target. She rushed back to him, dropping to her knees. "They came," she said. "They tried to get in." Daniel stared at her, his face pale. "Ryan?" he asked. "I don't know," Margaret replied. "But they weren't here to steal." Daniel closed his eyes. "They think I'm not dead enough," he whispered. Margaret pressed her forehead to his. "That ends," she said quietly. "Tonight, if I can help it." Her phone vibrated. A message. "Elena. I heard there was noise on your street. Are you all right?" Margaret stared at the screen. Too fast. Too convenient. The mask slipped, not on Elena's face, but in Margaret's understanding. They were watching. They had always been watching. Margaret typed back with steady fingers. Just a raccoon. I startled easily these days. A pause. Then, try to get some rest. Margaret set the phone down. She stood, went to the notebook, and flipped to the last page. She wrote one sentence. They know he's alive. Time was no longer a luxury. It was a countdown. Margaret looked at her son, alive, wounded, hunted, and felt the final piece of hesitation burn away. We can't wait anymore, she said. Daniel met her gaze. Then let them see me, he replied. Margaret shook her head. Not yet, she said. But soon. Outside, the night swallowed the sound of retreating footsteps. Inside, a mother accepted the price of silence, and prepared to spend it all. The morning arrived dressed as certainty. Margaret woke before the alarm, before the sun had fully claimed the sky. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded, listening to the house breathe. The clock read 7:12 a.m. The appointment was at 10. 3 hours. Daniel lay awake in the back room, dressed in borrowed clothes that did not quite fit him anymore. His face was thinner now, his eyes sharper, no longer just a survivor, but a witness waiting for the right moment to step forward. Are you ready? He asked quietly. Margaret looked at him for a long time before answering. No, she said. But we're going anyway. They left the house separately. Margaret first, alone, dressed in muted gray, her shoulders slightly hunched, her face pale enough to sell the story she had been performing for days. She carried no folder, no documents. Just her purse, light and unassuming. Daniel followed later, hidden in the back seat of Hannah's car, a hat pulled low, his posture careful. He did not speak. He did not need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. The office building stood downtown, glass and steel, polished and impersonal. The kind of place where lives were reduced to signatures and initials, where grief was measured in clauses and margins. Elena was already there. She stood near the reception desk, dressed in black again, but today, it was sharper. More confident. Her hair was flawless. Her makeup subtle and expensive. She looked like a woman who had already closed the door on mourning and stepped fully into entitlement. She smiled when she saw Margaret. There you are, Elena said, relief and satisfaction blending easily in her tone. I was worried you wouldn't come. Margaret nodded, eyes lowered. I said I would. Elena's hand tightened briefly around her arm, possessive, guiding. That's good, she said softly. This will be quick. Then we can all move forward. All, Margaret thought. She said nothing. They were ushered into a conference room where sunlight spilled across a long table. 2 lawyers waited. A notary sat beside them. Files were stacked neatly, ready. Elena took her seat at the head of the table. Margaret sat across from her. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're here to finalize the transfer of assets as outlined in Daniel Hale's will. Elena nodded briskly. Yes. Everything has already been reviewed. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. She kept them still. The lawyer turned to her. Mrs. Hale, you understand that you are not named as a beneficiary? Yes, Margaret said quietly. I understand. Elena exhaled, almost smiling. The papers were slid forward. Pages turned. Pens were uncapped. This is just a formality, Elena said lightly. Once this is done, the estate will be fully settled. Margaret glanced at the documents without reading them. She already knew what they said. She had known for days. The notary leaned forward. Mrs. Brooks, you may sign here. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper, steady, assured. This is what Daniel wanted, she said aloud, more for the room than for Margaret. He trusted me. The pen touched the page. Before it could move, the door opened. Not slammed. Not forced. Opened calmly. Footsteps entered the room. Slow. Deliberate. Margaret did not turn. Elena frowned, irritated. "Excuse me, this is a private." She stopped. The pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. The color drained from her face in one violent rush, leaving her skin pale and tight. "No," she whispered. The man standing in the doorway was thinner. Bruised. Scarred. But unmistakable. "Hello, Elena," Daniel Hale said quietly. The room froze. One of the lawyers stood abruptly. "What is this?" Elena stared, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, as if the air itself had betrayed her. She stammered. "You're dead." Daniel stepped forward. "I was supposed to be," he replied. "You made sure of that?" Margaret finally lifted her head. She met Elena's eyes, not with triumph, not with rage, but with something far more devastating. Recognition. "You told me," Margaret said softly, "that my son was buried." Daniel took another step into the light. "I walked home instead." Chaos erupted. Voices overlapped. Chairs scraped. The notary reached for his phone. One lawyer demanded explanations. Another stared at Daniel as if witnessing a ghost. Elena pushed back from the table, shaking violently. This is impossible," she cried. "This is some kind of trick." Daniel's voice cut through the noise. "I remember the road," he said. "I remember Ryan's hands. I remember you telling him to hurry." Elena screamed. "No. You're lying." Margaret stood. Slowly. Calmly. She placed her purse on the table and opened it. Inside were copies. Photographs. Dates. Times. Medical notes. Witness statements. A still image from a traffic camera, grainy, distant, undeniable. She slid them forward. "The police have already been notified," Margaret said evenly. "They're on their way." Elena collapsed into her chair, sobbing now, but it was not grief. It was exposure. As sirens wailed faintly in the distance, Daniel looked at his mother. "You waited," he said quietly. Margaret reached for his hand. "I promised," she replied. The inheritance lay unsigned. The widow's performance ended. And the truth, alive, breathing, and no longer willing to be hidden, stood in the room at last. For a moment, no one moved. The room existed in a suspended state, air thick, sound delayed, reality struggling to catch up with itself. Daniel stood at the doorway like a question no one had prepared to answer, his presence dismantling the lie brick by brick without raising his voice. Elena's sobs hitched, then stopped entirely. Her eyes darted from Daniel to Margaret, then to the papers spread across the table, as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. "This is a mistake," she said hoarsely. "Someone is making a terrible mistake." One of the lawyers spoke first, his voice unsteady. "Sir, can you state your name for the record?" Daniel stepped farther into the room. The light caught the faint bruising along his jaw, the stiffness in his movements, the marks that could not be rehearsed. "My name is Daniel Hale," he said. "And I'm very much alive." The notary's hands trembled as he lowered his phone. Elena lurched forward. No, you're doing this to ruin me," she cried, reaching toward Daniel before stopping herself, as if afraid he might vanish if touched. "You don't understand what you're saying." Daniel looked at her. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With something colder. "I understand exactly what I'm saying," he replied. "I also understand what you did." The door opened again. This time, the sound carried weight. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a detective in plain clothes. Their presence shifted the room entirely, authority stepping in where lies had ruled too long. "Daniel Hale?" the detective asked. Daniel nodded. "That's me." The detective exhaled slowly. "We've been waiting to confirm that." Elena's breath came out in a sharp gasp. "No," she whispered. "You said he was dead." "I identified him." "You identified a body," the detective interrupted. "Not his body." Silence slammed into the room. Ryan Carter was escorted in moments later, his hands cuffed, his face gray with disbelief. When he saw Daniel, he stopped walking entirely. "That's not possible," Ryan muttered. He stopped himself too late. The detective's eyes flicked to him. "You what, Mr. Carter?" Ryan said nothing. Elena screamed. "Don't listen to him. He's confused. He hit his head, he doesn't remember things clearly." Daniel stepped forward until they were face to face. "I remember you checking the road," he said quietly. "I remember you holding my arms while she told you to hurry." Elena collapsed into the chair, shaking violently. Margaret watched it all from her place at the table, her hands folded neatly, her heart pounding, but not wildly. This was not chaos to her. This was order being restored. The detective turned to Elena. "Mrs. Brooks, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice." Elena's head snapped up. "You can't take me," she cried. "I'm a widow." Margaret finally spoke. "No," she said calmly. "You're a liar." The officers moved in. Elena resisted weakly, her screams echoing through the room as handcuffs closed around her wrists. Ryan followed, his bravado evaporated, his gaze fixed on the floor. As they were led out, Elena twisted back toward Margaret, eyes wild. "You planned this," she shrieked. "You did this to me." Margaret met her gaze without flinching. "You did this to yourself," she said. The room emptied slowly. Officials murmured. Papers were gathered. Phones buzzed. Daniel sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Margaret crossed the room and stood behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You came back," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his eyes closing briefly. "Because you waited." Outside, sirens faded. Inside, the lie was gone. And for the first time since midnight had taken her son away, Margaret allowed herself to breathe, deeply, fully, knowing the world had finally been forced to see what she had protected all along. The dead man had walked in. And the truth walked out free.